So, as you hopefully now are aware, I am Tom Cross, this is Drake Conti, and this is our capabilities for the tech companies to become threat actors. So I'm the head of threat research at Get Real Security, and Greg is a former West Point professor and was also an Army intelligence officer. We are both principals at Gideon, and we teach classes here at DEF CON training, which I'm told you can still sign up for if you want to. So we're teaching information operations tomorrow and Sunday, and then on Monday and Tuesday we're teaching adversarial thinking, which is like sort of a deep dive on how to find vulnerabilities, all kinds of things. So moving forward to the next slide. Cyberpunk science fiction gives us this understanding of this vision of these evil mega corporations, which have more power than nation states and which exercise their own agendas, right? So in Stone Crash, there's Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong, which is a sort of like a gated community that you can purchase citizenship in, and it has its own prisons. And the question is, how close are we to this reality today? So we don't know the answers. The purpose of this talk is to get you guys to ask new kinds of questions, hopefully. Hackers are really good at seeing the distinction between what something is supposed to be and what it really is. And there's lots of interesting issues that exist within that gap. There's a couple of trends, that we've noticed. One is that we're in a policy at DEF CON Village. Policy discussions about tech companies for the past few decades have been focused on privacy issues because tech companies deal with information. Increasingly, tech companies have new kinds of capabilities that are deployed. Robots, drones. If those things are misused, there's completely different consequences, right? And then the other thing that we're concerned with is conflict in the world, and the way that changes the nature of the decision-making process that organizations engage in. So we've got a lot of really dense slides, which hopefully you've downloaded, and they're intended, we're going to have to go over them really quickly, but they're intended for you to go back to, so I'm actually glad you all downloaded them. So as you're thinking about these issues, there's a bunch of detail in there that you could potentially get some benefit out of. So for Greg and I, this conversation really started by thinking about what was going on in Ukraine. When Russia invaded Ukraine, obviously Ukraine responded, but also a bunch of private organizations responded. Thousands of companies made individual decisions as a consequence of the outbreak of that conflict. Those decisions exist on a spectrum, right? So the simplest thing is that a lot of companies decided to exit a market, which is expensive and difficult for them to do, right? Maybe they decided to block a particular IP range from using their services. But there are deeper kinds of things that people do. Some people are providing information security services to things on one side of that conflict. Some people are providing infrastructure. Think about Elon Musk's satellite network. It's going to come up a lot. They're providing infrastructure to one side or both sides. We've also seen people who maintain NPM packages that are used in a lot of software projects, putting logic bombs in their code that will go off and destroy data if the project is executed from a certain IP address range, right? So that's a pretty aggressive action. We've seen people who are involved in sort of like amateur hacking groups who are targeting things, right? So there's this whole spectrum. In the Army, people talk about effects-based operations because the Army, when you think of an Army, you tend to have this like sort of oversimplified idea of blowing things up. That's what armies do, right? They shoot at stuff. But in fact, what armies do is try to affect what's going on. They try to channel people's behavior and create consequences. And there's a whole spectrum of things that you can do that can channel behavior and create consequences, which don't necessarily amount to blowing things up. So effects-based operations considers the spectrum, and the spectrum of things that companies are doing fit into that spectrum. So we've got a couple examples in the next slide, which are about the fact that during conflict, people's behavior changes from what you'd normally expect. So if you're ever in the Netherlands, There's a fantastic museum, the Dutch Resistance Museum, that talks about what people in the Netherlands did during Nazi occupation. The other thing on the screen is an OSS manual that was published during World War II. OSS is sort of a precursor to the CIA. This is a simple sabotage manual. And it's about if you have a job in an organization, maybe you work for the enemy, or you work in a company, but your country's been conquered, and so your company now serves the other side, right? What could you do to throw sand in the gears? Could you, and some of it's really funny, bureaucratic obtuseness. You could refer things to committees, have unnecessary meetings. One of the things they suggest is holding lots of conferences where you get people out of the office, you get them drinking, they're not getting work done, right? The point here is that the way people behave changes in a conflict. And so Greg and I made this next slide, which sort of thinks about, like, are there capabilities that companies have that maybe they don't realize they have, that maybe they would use differently in a conflict? We talked about Trojan NPM packages. Another example is a situation like a ride-sharing service. Like maybe if there's a battle going on, they have a logistic function, moving people and material around, right? So we wrote this slide and we included it in a discussion at a much more corporate security conference. And they asked us to remove it because they thought that discussion was a little bit too ethically challenging for them. And so we thought, we'll do a whole talk on this at DEF CON. This is the place where we can get together and have conversations that are ethically challenging. So let me give you a couple of questions that come to mind for us. So the first thing is, what are the real capabilities of your organization, right? Are there things that you might use differently in a conflict? Are there risks associated with doing that, right? Particularly with respect to the law of armed conflict. Are there things you could do that would make you a lawful combatant, where it's legal to shoot at you? Are there things you think you would never do, right? So on the slide, there's this picture of it's Ulysses. He's crossing this area where there are these sirens, and he wants to make sure he's not going to change course when they show up. So he binds himself to the mast. And so this is the idea of the Ulysses Pact. Can you do something either from a technical or organizational architecture in your organization that binds you to a particular decision and prevents you from changing it when circumstances change? So the other question that I think comes up that's really, really interesting when we think about this is, who's in charge here? Are the corporations in charge? Are the governments in charge? And it turns out that answer to that depends on the circumstances. Greg.
Okay. I'm going to use this microphone.
Oh, okay.
And I'll take the clicker though. Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us at Green Screen of Death room here. So if you think, you probably have all seen them slides that show the actors in cyberspace, right? And you've got insider threats, you have individuals, you have lone hackers, you have various flavors of collectives, patriotic hackers, mercenary groups, and the like. And then from there, you can envision going into small, medium, and large countries. But what's rarely, if ever, included, and we make a point of including it, are companies, right? Corporations are 100% actors in cyberspace conflict and cognitive conflict, and the capabilities they possess. Our argument is, if you look at some of the largest tech companies and put them up against nation states in the cyber domain or the cognitive domain, it's close, right? And one of our ideas here, let's see.
Other way.
Oh, yeah, the forward button. Okay. The idea here is that you've got corporations, you have governments of various sizes, and all these other threat actor groups are just groups who have influence on cyberspace, all interacting in this giant graph of interactions. And if you could choose your favorite tech company, where would their capabilities be against what size country? Where is the equivalence, right? Where would it be a fair fight? Where would a major tech titan be able to overmatch a country in cyberspace? So that was kind of like our inspiration. So you can envision this graph of different sized bubbles where you have big company bubbles and big government bubbles and small, and all interacting. And I think the idea of this is this can be mapped. It could be a graph. It's amenable to automation. And then when you look at, the interaction, if you took a company and a government, there's interaction, there's levers of power that they each will attempt to use. So if you think of a company trying to influence a government, they use lobbying. You think some of the big tech titans have entire wings of their organization inside Washington, D.C. and in capitals around the world. They use campaign donations, they use lawsuits, they can exit markets. There's a lot of tools companies have over governments. Now flip that around, right? So this is a push-pull or a tug-of-war. The flip side of that is governments have levers of power over corporations. So you have laws, regulation, law enforcement, taxes and tariffs, access to markets, government purchasing authority and ability to shift markets through their purchasing, and even espionage and sabotage. So where it gets interesting, if you think about big corporation, smaller country, the corporation can be more aggressive in pursuing its interests. The guardrails put in place to protect or keep that company or corporation in a box are much weaker. And the company can coerce the government. And then if you envision the flip side of that, major country, medium-sized or smaller company, different rules apply. You have the corporation must compromise more. The guardrails put in place around the company are much stronger. At the end of the day, the company gets coerced by the government or influenced by the government. And you can't see this, and we wanted to get a sense for, I'm throwing out there big countries, small countries, big companies, small companies. How can you get some sense of correlation? And in the deck, you'll see we've got a chart using one snapshot of relatively recent data that looks at market cap of the company and market cap of the entire nation's stock market, basically, right? So that's a reasonable way to give some sense for the relative power, relative relationship. And the top 9 are, New York Stock Exchange, Shanghai Stock Exchange, Tokyo Stock Exchange, et cetera, Bombay, Hong Kong, Toronto. Number 10, with this data, I admit it's constantly shifting, Microsoft. Number 11, Apple. Skip the London Stock Exchange, then you hit NVIDIA. And I know these are, obviously the data's a little stale. Then you get into Saudi, Taiwan, Germany, then Amazon, and then Alphabet, right? And then Meta's at 24. So you've got, seven major corporations in the top 24 in the world by market cap. So that one company's market cap is as big as the entire stock market.
So MOS is a model that is used in human intelligence. You're trying to get someone who works in an organization to leak information to you, and you're trying to manipulate them into doing so. There's a set of different levers that you might look for. So money, political ideology, coercion, or ego. We thought this model actually might be useful to apply to like a corporate CEO or a corporate leadership team to think about like what their motivations might be. Usually we think about corporations having an economic motivation, and that at least allows us to predict their behavior, right? We assume they're going to do what's in their financial best interest. But there are other situations where corporations might do something that is not in their economic best interest, but serves some other motivation, right? Sometimes a corporate leadership team might be ideologically motivated. That might affect their decision-making, particularly in a time of conflict. A corporate leadership team might have really big egos, and that might affect their judgment with respect to decisions that they are faced with. In addition, they might be coerced or subject to influence that they're not aware of, where someone is trying to manipulate them into making a certain set of choices, right? So it's kind of an interesting way of thinking about when a corporation might behave differently than you would normally expect. So Jason Healy gave us this concept also that like when you're thinking of like cyber actions, It's not a simple thing where some actions are state-sponsored and some actions are not state-sponsored. There's all these layers of gray. Sometimes the government is hacking you. Sometimes the government is encouraging a criminal group to hack you. Sometimes the criminal group is hacking you and the government knows it and they're sort of turning a blind eye to it, right? Sometimes the government doesn't want the hacking group doing that and they're trying to stop it, right? So there's this whole spectrum. With respect to corporate activities, the same spectrum exists. There might be situations where a company is hacking you. There might be a situation where a company is encouraging a criminal group to hack you. There might be situations where obviously a company is fighting to stop hacking from occurring, right? So the same sort of like different sets of scenarios exist, and in fact they intersect with each other. So you can have situations where the corporation and the government are aligned, that they don't like this criminal hacking group and they're trying to stop them together, right? There are situations where they're also both aligned that they're in favor of a particular offensive action and they're strategically aligned in taking that action. What's interesting is when they're not aligned, right? So when a corporation wants to do something and it's not aligned with their national strategy. So for example, a unilateral decision to deactivate satellites that's being made by a company and not a government, right? The other side of the coin could be a situation where the government wants to do something and the corporation doesn't consent. So the Defense Production Act is used to commandeer capabilities of a company and use those capabilities in offensive warfare, irrespective of the company's leadership's point of view, right? Corporations and governments also behave differently in peacetime and in wartime. So in peacetime, we expect companies to be financially motivated. We expect them to be compliant with laws. The government is usually in partnership with large organizations and has some regulatory pressure that take place. In wartime, the behaviors change. Most corporations, if they are purely financially motivated, might be interested in sustaining their operations despite the conflict. So they're looking for ways to continue to function. Maybe they've got stuff on both sides and they have to balance that. Maybe they separate for a while. They tend to not want to take strong positions on the conflict. And governments become much more coercive, right? Maybe they commandeer capabilities. They're issuing sanctions. They're trying to control who you can trade with, all that stuff. When we think about how governments view the capabilities that private organizations have, they're going to view those capabilities through the lens of the things that they're trying to accomplish, systematically, right? So when you think of what a military needs to do, it needs to collect intelligence, right? It needs to engage in reconnaissance so that it understands what's really going on in the world. It tries to influence people's opinions. It wants access to networks, right? It has supply and logistics challenges. It needs to arrest people or destroy things. There are various capabilities that different organizations have that might roll up into those different motivations, right? From an intelligence collection standpoint, well, back to this privacy issue, corporations might have a lot of data that's useful. When you're talking about access to networks, like maybe a company has built an appliance that was purchased by a lot of people in that country and they ship updates to it on a regular basis that we could put some code in, right? Perhaps, if you're talking about like arresting people or destroying things, you could commandeer some robot taxis and have them strategically get in car accidents in particular places where you need that to occur, right? Again, it's useful to think about how a government might use a capability that an organization has in a time of conflict. Right?
Yeah. So there are processes in place. Governments have processes in place. Militaries have processes in place to be able to scale this type of effects. They start with their overall desired strategy, their outcomes they're looking for. They have a list of targets and they prioritize them. Then they look at their portfolio of capabilities. We've Tom's just illustrated some here, and we're going to go into some fun details, I think, later. Then they're going to use those, create missions based on those capabilities to achieve the effects that they're looking for. and then they'll assess it. But the idea is like, this is a defined process. It's fires and effects wheel or fires process. And it maps really well to how militaries think about this, but also the idea that these capabilities could be part of that inside a government, plan or in a corporate plan. And you may have seen on the internet, we posted this slide in advance, but think about the products that you use of various companies. Choose your favorite social networking site. They expose free capabilities, free air quotes free, capabilities to us, right? And then if you want to pay a little more, you can get premium. You can know who visited your page, for example. So they upsell additional capabilities, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg. Go a little further. Again, your social networking site. Think about the capabilities it says it uses and the ones it actually uses but doesn't talk about. And then keep going. And this pyramid's getting bigger and bigger as you go, that what other capabilities does it have, but it's chosen not to use? For example, several years ago, a company kind of hacked together augmented reality glasses with facial recognition, and you could just look around the room and see who people were. So that's a deeper capability. Now, they knew it existed, but at the time they didn't pursue it. Right? And now we're starting to see that companies are pursuing that. And then underneath it all, at the base of this pyramid, are additional capabilities that exist, but the company is just a lack of imagination on the company's part, and not necessarily a lack of imagination on the potential threat actor's part. It has the ability to do things it hasn't even considered. And consider the humble Wi-Fi enabled light bulb. And you think about it, it has power, it has a network connection, and what are its capabilities? So what I did is I asked, so ChatGPT is not good for certain things like random numbers or math, but it is good for writing marketing copy and corporate mission statements. So I asked it for a corporate mission statement, or a cynical but true mission statement for the light bulb company, and it came up with to disguise surveillance and ad tech infrastructure as home convenience. So now, if you think about the basic capabilities of it knows when light bulb's on, it knows when it's off, it has a network connectivity. Well, it can help generate pattern of life data. It could potentially do Bluetooth or Wi-Fi device scanning. A mobile app that connects to it could provide location data. Now, imagine if we add a microphone and motion sensors to this light bulb. So we asked again ChatGPT. It delivered. I want a cheesy product name, and I wanted some selling points of this light bulb. Right. So it's the Tron Loom. Smarter light for smarter living, and they're selling these capabilities as features. Right? But in reality, they're, I think very double-edged sword at best. Adaptive presence detection. Your light knows now when you're nearby, even before you touch a switch. Intelligent room insights. Optimize your routines with discrete occupancy awareness. Right? So keeping going. Peace of mind, reinvented. Receive real-time updates when unexpected movement is detected in your home. And seamless integration syncs effortlessly with your smart home ecosystem. Okay, that's a light bulb, the Tron Loom. Now, if you haven't seen the images of the Earth from space at night, how many light bulbs are on the planet? It's really hard to get an accurate number of the number of light bulbs, and obviously they're not all smart light bulbs. But if you put those types of sensors and deploy them globally, what does that create? What type of picture does that create? And it's pretty significant. And the one that we had, because what we're doing is we're walking through product, and then what a company could do, and then what a megacorp with portfolio companies would be capable of. So our next product was the vacuum cleaner robot. And this was probably the one we had the most fun with. Tom, I just noticed your shirt there is perfectly, very appropriate for, yeah. So what, if your vacuum cleaner robot, let's just say, was evil, right? What could your evil vacuum cleaner robot do? Well, it could map your home for future intrusion. It can be audio and video surveillance, for intelligence, for blackmail, for, of course, serving ads, or ideological compliance, right? It could be covert mapping or jamming of the EM spectrum. It could control TVs, phones, or IoT devices without probably being detected. It could generate non-audible sounds that influence humans and pets, right? It could drive your pets crazy and you wouldn't know what it was. DNA collection, right? Biometric harvesting potentially, and even covert cyber, malware delivery, or physical payload delivery, small, right? It could even accidentally malfunction, and it to cause, air quotes, malfunction, trip you or cause injury or damage in some way. And the mission statement there is to normalize autonomous surveillance under the guise of household hygiene.
I want to add that we've seen some
yeah.
high vulnerability research into vacuum cleaners and lawnmowers, kind of data to collect.
Yeah, and so one of our takeaways is it's not what a system says it does, it's what it's actually capable of doing. And the hacker community is really good, and there's some great research out there. There are specialists in robotic vacuums in the hacker community and do some really cool work.
Why does your vacuum have a face recognition module?
Yeah. So as thinking about what are some facets for analyzing the true, not stated, but the true capabilities. Think about of a product. Does it have actuation capabilities? Can it interact with the environment? That's a term of art from robotics. Does it have an arm, for example? What is its power source? What physical areas does it have access to? Is it mobile or not? And probably most importantly is its sensor suite. What sensors does it have? And what communications capabilities does it have? And we have more examples in the slides. Okay, so now we talked light bulbs and robotic vacuums. Let's take it up a level to companies. What could an evil cybersecurity company do, right? Well, they have global sensor networks and intelligence analysis teams, perhaps performing attribution for hire. You want documentation that makes it look like a particular threat actor did something. It could silently exfiltrate data. It could silently ignore specific alerts and malware, and search user files at scale across the entire ecosystem. So cybersecurity companies have a lot of power. Here our mission statement is to turn paranoia into pipeline, FUD into ARR, and ODE into Q4 growth opportunities. So, and if you've seen, and you can't see there, but that's LinkedIn, if it isn't good for anything, it's great for these giant infographics on cybersecurity companies and all the little pie charts and little delineations of all the different types of cybersecurity companies. If you think of that and say, what if each of those companies was evil? If each class of company was evil, and then what could it do with those capabilities, the things it's structurally able to do, even if they are latent capabilities? Yeah. 3. Okay. So think about what a cloud company can do. Right now, everything herds us to putting information into the cloud. It could harvest tokens and harvest secrets across its ecosystem. It could throttle critical infrastructure. And we have more in the slides. What could an AI company do? Well, it could enable AI orchestrated belief collapse. Right? Whatever belief system you want to cause damage to, it could help support that. You could model and simulate real individuals at scale. You could have synthetic persona swarms. Rideshare companies, what's different there? They're mobile, right? So you have mobile platforms. It could be covert mapping, selectively deny service, send specific cars or specific drivers. It could listen in on every conversation across the fleet. Coercive transport. And if we keep going, so everyone's familiar, I think, with Tony Stark, Iron Man. One of my favorite quotes is, Captain America says to Tony Stark, "Big man in a suit of armor, take that off, what are you?" And Tony's response was, "Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist," right? It was a good line. Now, imagine a megacorp run by a genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist that has, I don't know, in the slides we have like 15 portfolio companies, the types of companies we just said, but imagine others, an adult website, a dating site, space or government, a company puts things into space, robotics or a defense contractor, genomics, payment processing. And across that whole portfolio, the capabilities are off the scale. And loop back to what I said about the power of these large corporations rivaling governments. Think about that, pretty significant. Okay, Tom.
So also think about what kinds of capabilities are going to be available in the near-term future, right? So technology is constantly advancing. So we're in a place now, where are we going to be in 5 years? Increasingly ubiquitous robotic systems is one of these things that we're beginning to see. Like, if you're in a major city, you probably have robot taxis. Maybe you've got robots inside your house, and these robots, are going to become more and more sophisticated pretty rapidly. Neural interfacing is a thing that people are playing around with, right? So, what kinds of exposure do you have to all this infrastructure? Another thing that, we have, so an LLM is really a predictive model of language, right? So what other kinds of predictive models are we going to start creating with AI? Predictive models of an individual person's behavior, perhaps, or if it's predictive models of like parts of a civilization. I'm really interested in that idea. So, what can people do about these observations, right? So, there's a set of things that a company could do. So companies typically consider misuse, perhaps, like unauthorized misuse by a criminal, right? Or misuse by their users. Sometimes companies consider misuse by their employees. We're also suggesting that they consider misuse by their executive leadership team and potentially misuse by a government that comes in and appropriates the capabilities of the company, right? And if they think about those things, they can decide to try to put controls in place, like architectural controls or organizational checks and balances that prevent them from doing that stuff, that Ulysses Pact that I was talking about. Potentially, so I like the idea of engaging with, the civil society. Like an NGO could come in, a nonprofit could come in and audit your company and publish a certification that you're not engaged in a particular behavior. Right? And that's not really an assurance, but we know that if that relationship breaks down, that we can't trust that situation, right? So really what we're suggesting is, if you're a company that perhaps has an internal, mission statement that says don't be evil, maybe you should take that, have a red teaming exercise where you say, well, what if we were? And you sit down and think about all of the things that you could potentially do, and you make a list of them. And then you go through that list and say, okay, what do we do about this? Should we put controls around this? Maybe we want to do this one. Whatever it is, you go through the list and consider the implications of the list. And I want to emphasize some of the good work that's going on in sort of AI safety. It's interesting. So this is like Anthropic's AI safety work. They're looking at, LLMs are really good at pulling in information from a whole lot of different sources and putting it together for you. So can you ask it how to commit a crime? Can you ask it how to make a chemical, nuclear, or biological weapon? Well, they're looking at that, and they're trying to figure out if it can be helpful to people that are actually trying to do that, and can they put some guardrails in around that, right? So it's very interesting work. However, they're very open about this. They're like, this is for end user misuse of our system. We're not looking at internal misuse. Like, they're very clear about that. And of course, we're talking about not just insider misuse, but authorized misuse. So what could governments do about this? I tend to think that governments, like all the conversations we have, the national security engagement that happens between the United States government, at least, and the private sector is usually framed around this idea of critical infrastructure. And there's lots of things that have dangerous capabilities that are not critical infrastructure. Social media can be used to influence people, but it's not critical infrastructure. Robot taxis are not critical infrastructure, but they're incredibly dangerous, right? So perhaps a government could sit down and do a systematic analysis of the different capabilities that exist in the world, and like how they might utilize those capabilities offensively, right? And then they could say, maybe we want to do that. We want to get set up to do that, right? Maybe they say, we are worried that some other government will use that capability in a way that's not aligned with our strategy. Or they're worried that the company itself will use that capability that's not in a way that's not aligned with our strategy. And so then they need to sit down and ask, how do they ensure that those capabilities are used in a way that's aligned with that? And so building relationships with these organizations, there might be carrots and sticks, there might be policy frameworks that don't exist that they can use to control this stuff. But they're not going to build those things if they haven't thought through it. Great.
Okay, good. So as we wrap, what are the key takeaways of this? One is bring your own projector to DEF CON, because if we'd had one, we would just set it up and been everyone would want to see the talks in this room.
Put the slides out in like 8 foot by
And have someone carry it out. So that's our takeaway. But what are the takeaways? Like most companies, we believe optimistically, don't intend to misuse their power, but the power still exists. And ignoring it invites misuse. So it needs to be taken into account. If you're a company, you should know your capabilities and threat model accordingly. You need well-informed internal controls that consider these potential events taking place, and perhaps tailored government oversight in particular areas is a way to rein in the worst of activities. And if you're a user, you just don't trust the stated purpose of anything. Instead, ask what the system can do. And once you are sensitized and you think about, all the capabilities that are not obvious, once you're sensitized, say, what can this actually do? You'll see it everywhere. And ask, think of that pyramid where what they say they're going to do, what could they actually do, right? So at the end of the day, it's not what a system claims to do, it's about what it can do, and the rest is just details. So that's our talk, and I did want to thank you. Like, we found out 30 minutes before we were supposed to go live that there was no projector, and we had, the slide deck's really good. We put a ton of time in it. So please take a look at it, and appreciate your patience in dealing with that.
Yeah. So one last thought for me is just like, people will say, when you say, this company could do this evil thing, and people will say, well, yeah, but they're not going to, because that's crazy. Right? But the thing is that the circumstances can change. And when those circumstances change, perhaps that crazy thing that you would never do becomes something that you feel is necessary and vital. No one's going to backdoor an NPM package from, you know what I mean? Like, it's until there was a war going on, and then people said, oh, actually, that's what I want to do now, right? So like people's decision-making process completely changes in those circumstances. And that's why the talent that you guys have for identifying those dark capabilities is potentially valuable, and don't let people dismiss those things by saying it's crazy. Thank you.
Yeah, you can call them out. Yeah, so they've got a really tight turnaround time in this room. We're going to be out in the hallway. We'll get farther away. We thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you.